Prepare to experience the strongest radio allowable by law. Secrets will be revealed. Myths dispelled. From the studio gym where excuses never apply, it's Superhuman Radio with your host, Carl Lenore.
Hey, welcome back to another episode of Superhuman Radio. You know, they're all important shows. They really are. We don't talk about any topics that don't ultimately have an impact on the quality of your life and longevity. Alzheimer's disease is a big deal today. Tens of millions of people suffer from it. And the age of the onset of Alzheimer's is becoming younger and younger. One of the things that we've talked about, even with Dr. Dale Bredesen, when we've talked about Alzheimer's disease, has been meditation. Yet, I don't know why. And I took TM in 1997, and I don't even meditate consistently. Yet, I talk about its benefits, and I tell other people that they should meditate every day. Something about meditation, I don't know why, but it just doesn't grab people like it should. And it really, really should. Because it may be the greatest thing we can do today to affect not only physical aging, but mental aging. And we're going to talk about this today because there's a study that's been published that shows that regular meditation may in fact protect you from developing dementia and Alzheimer's. Before we get started, of course, I have to thank our title sponsor. That's Legendary Foods. The URL is shrnetwork.biz/legendary. Everybody who tries the tasty pastries messages me and says the greatest snack they've ever had, less than 1 gram of sugar, 20 grams of high quality protein. You'll feel like you're cheating, but you're not. Go to shrnetwork.biz/legendary. Use the code SHR10 to save 10% off. Or listen with great intention during the commercial breaks. Listen for the secret word. Email the secret word along with your mailing address to onair@superhumanradio.net, and we will send you a free box of tasty pastries so you can try them yourself. And now, without further delay, my guest today is Dr. Andrew Newberg. How you doing, Dr. Newberg? Welcome to the show.
Good, thanks. Thanks for having me on the program.
Yeah, now that this is the longest running health and fitness podcast in the world. I'm in my 16th year. We've talked about meditation on this show on and off for 16 years. But even I am guilty of talking about it, but not following my own. You know, what is it about meditation that just doesn't make it sexy enough for people to realize this could be the single most valuable thing they do every day next to breathing?
Well, you're right, and it's cheap. You could do it on your own without ever having to pay anybody anything. Yeah, you know, it's interesting. I think part of it is that there are so many different kinds, and people get a lot of different kinds of information about, you know, how it works and what are the best ways to do it. And so I think there's a lot of confusion out there about, you know, what needs to be done. I think a lot of times people think, oh, well, you know, I'm not going to, you know, move to Tibet and sit on a mountaintop for the rest of my life and achieve enlightenment. And what we're trying to say is that, you know, kind of what your fundamental point is that it's something that's so easy to do, has so many wonderful benefits for us, and is something that doesn't actually have to take a long time. And so we try to find, actually, in some of our studies, which I know we'll talk about, you know, practices that can be done in very short periods of time that really can have a lot of benefit, as you said, for both the brain and the body. So I think it is important for people to really take a look at it and see if it's something that they can find a way to implement and try to find something that works for them. And that to me is always one of the key pieces that I try to advise people on, which is, you know, how does one go about trying to figure out the right kind of practice that feels right, that feels good, and that's something that you can engage on a daily basis, or at least consistently enough that it has its effects for you.
When I was in my 20s, I lived in Las Vegas, Nevada. I had a girl that I dated, and we used to go to this metaphysical store on Maryland Parkway in Tropicana. And one day there was a guy there giving a class on meditation. His name was Ram Dass. Have you ever heard of him?
Sure.
So I had the good fortune of not realizing that I was in the presence of greatness when it comes to meditation and spirituality. And I started meditating at that point in time. Great things happened in my life. I got married after that, had children. My life got derailed. I forgot about meditation. In 1997, I took a TM class. Back then, it was $200. And it promised, free revisits where if, you're having trouble, you need to get recentered, you can. And I thought, well, it's a good value, $250. Today, a TM class costs upwards of $1,000. Now, I want to make a point. Do you need to spend $1,000 to take a TM class? No, we're going to show you that today.
Right.
But think about this. People pay $1,000 for TM willingly today because of the benefits that they hear from their friends of TM. And we're going to talk about something I've never heard of before until preparing for this interview. And Natalie Kapitsky was kind enough to put this up. But Kirtan Kriya, am I saying that right?
Yes, Kirtan Kriya. Mm-hmm.
I like Kirtan Kriya better than my own TM. And, I have a mantra, So I've had theories over the years from my early introduction into meditation. So I want to run these by you, and I want you to correct me.
Okay.
The brain is not designed to be going continuously from thought to thought all day long. But that's what we do, right? We go, and now it's even worse because we have this device pushing us and prodding us and say, hey, pay attention to me, pay attention to me. So when we're infants, we have no vocabulary. We have emotions and feelings, but we have no words, nothing symbolic to attach to it.
Correct.
The development of vocabulary that actually creates the fodder or the components for thought. And now we use these thoughts idly, sitting still. Our mind is never quiet anymore. Once you're not an infant, your mind is never quiet anymore because vocabulary drives thoughts, and we hop from thought to thought to thought. Am I wrong that the brain is really not designed to go from thought to thought to thought all day long without rest?
Well, I guess it depends a little bit on how you're thinking about going from thought to thought. And you're right in the sense that, certainly when we are inundated with all these different ideas and concepts and things we have to do with our job and our relationships and so forth, it can certainly overwhelm the brain. And in that regard, just like everything, just like our heart, it's great to be able to run, but you got to stop and you have to rejuvenate your energy stores. Now, there are some natural ways that the brain does that. We have sleep, for example, and so when our brain sleeps, that's part of what it's doing. But even just during the regular day, it is helpful to be able to have some times that allows the brain to recover from excessive amounts of stimuli. But on the other hand, what we also know, and this is why I'm being a little cagey in how I answer your question, the brain is always on. So even when we are in our quiet times, our brain, our mind can wander. We may daydream, and that's all good stuff too. Daydreaming can be good. Mind wandering can be good. In fact, there's some evidence to show that those are some of the more creative times that our brain can process information, and our brain just kind of comes up with things even when we're not being given a lot of external stimuli. So a lot of what we talk about, and we just recently published a book called Brainweaver, and we talk a lot about the balance of stress. Our brain needs stress in order to develop, but we also need to modulate that stress and have it not be overwhelming to the point where, just like a muscle, if you overstress a muscle, you tear it and you can't use it. But if you use, and it doesn't recover, or it doesn't recover well. Whereas if you work it slowly and carefully and you keep stressing it, then it will develop better and better. And that's part of how I think meditation practices work. But it's to your point that stressing the brain is good. overstressing the brain can become a problem. And when you are overstressed, which so often does happen in today's world, being able to find some ways of turning that down, of giving the brain a little time to relax, is very, very important. And it doesn't have to be hours. Again, some other studies that we've done show that doing a 30-second or a 1-minute just breathing exercise really helps to kind of quiet the brain down and calm your body and your brain down so that it can work more effectively. So it doesn't have to be hours and hours a day. It can be something very, very short. And the Kirtan Kriya, which is kind of a mid-level, is only about 12 minutes a day. So it doesn't take that long to really be able to achieve some very, very powerful and very long-lasting effects.
And there's some things I really like about Kirtan Kriya that actually I think I'm going to start using that as my meditation. Also, TM, they say, oh, you got to meditate twice a day for 20 minutes. That's a bit more investment of time. Some people are discouraged by that.
Absolutely.
I have friends who are, let's say, religious, who refuse to meditate because they want to know, like my mantra, and I know you're not supposed to tell anybody, but I've already told other people. My mantra is a Sanskrit word, and it's irim. And when I said that to my sister once, when she was still alive, she says, how do you know you're not praying to a God, some God? How do you know you're not, So there are some people out there who are afraid of meditation because they're afraid that they're worshiping other than their deity that they choose to worship. Have you heard people say that to you?
Yeah, absolutely. This to me is an important piece of advice that I always give to people who are about to engage in some kind of meditation practice, which is that you really have to do a little bit of homework before you start something. You want to make sure that it's consistent with your beliefs. And if you do have a particular religious tradition, are you going to be comfortable with it? Are you going to learn certain things that might feel, like it's not really doing things the way you want to, or might even be contradictory to your own belief system? A lot of practices, like even the Kirtan Kriya practice, that's also based on certain terms and certain ideas, but they are often very secularized. Mindfulness today has also been very secularized, even though it derives from some of the Hindu and Buddhist tradition. So, people can find, anybody who goes to a yoga class, yoga has a very rich spiritual tradition.
Right.
But most people in the United States who are doing yoga are not, praying to Shiva and so forth. It's just about doing the exercises and relaxing the body. So as long as you feel comfortable with that, that's fine. But also, for people who are of a particular religious tradition, part of what we say to them is, there's a lot of good practices in almost every tradition. So if you're Catholic and you love to do the rosary, that could be a wonderful practice to do. If you're Jewish and you love to daven, that can be a wonderful practice. So and actually one of the pieces of information that we have learned from all of our brain scan studies of these different practices is that what makes them the most effective is when it is something that you can fully engage and believe in. If you're just doing it because somebody told you to do it, and that goes for being religious as well. If you're just sitting in church and you're just praying, but you're not, you're just mumbling the words. It's really so much more powerful when it's something that you really can do, you feel good about it. And that's why you have to kind of do a little bit of that homework first.
You almost, when you really believe in something, when you're emotionally invested in it.
Yes.
You almost, you do. You have like almost dopaminergic effect. You can feel the hair on the back of your neck. You feel like you're in the presence of greatness, even though you're sitting there by yourself. And I understand that's where the magic is. Yeah. Doing something that makes you feel like that for minutes a day is really where the magic comes from. One other thing I want to mention, and then I want to talk about the research.
Yes.
So I asked Ram Dass this question. I said, I'm going to say something, and I'm sure there's a lot of people in the audience who are going to go, oh, I always thought that. I said to him, I think I'm going to die of thinking someday. I just can't get my brain to shut off. And he said, the silence in between thoughts is what you should pursue. And I said, well, how do I pursue that? He said, quietly ask yourself this question in your head. I wonder what my next thought will be. Because when you say that to yourself, you instinctively, your brain starts to wait and see what your next thought is. And he said, and practice that until the pauses become longer and longer and longer. And that is something I still do today when I feel a little anxious and I'll just ask myself that question. I wonder what my next thought will be. Have you heard of that?
Yes. And again, it kind of comes back to the fact that there are thousands of different meditation techniques, and there isn't a one size fits all. And so, even in my own clinical practice as a physician, when people say, gee, I'd really love to do a meditation practice, part of what we talk to them about is, well, how are you as a person? Are you able to sit quietly and just watch your thoughts? Do you need something to sort of hold on to, like a mantra? And are you somebody who can sit still, or do you need to move around? And so there are a lot of different ways of trying to engage those practices. And I like what you just said too, which is, just the idea of sort of being there in the moment and waiting for your thoughts. I mean, it's very much a mindfulness oriented kind of concept, and that can work great for some people, but other people, and obviously, for example, if it works really well for you, that's fantastic. But then there are some other people who say, oh, I just, then I'm nervous. I get anxious because I'm worried about what I'm going to,
Right.
So
what's going to pop up. Let's talk about your study.
Sure.
Alzheimer's disease is a horrible disease, and it robs people's minds before their bodies. Talk about your research. First of all, why this study? Was there something that preceded this that made you think, gee, I wonder if we can have an effect with people that are suffering from Alzheimer's disease?
Well, I had been studying the practice of practices of meditation for a number of years, since the 1990s, really, and looking at how they affect the brain and what's going on. And actually was approached by a Dr. Dharma Singh Khalsa of the Alzheimer's Research and Prevention Foundation, who have been really pioneering a lot of exciting work in this area. And he was actually the one who introduced me to Kirtan Kriya. And he said, well, here's a meditation that's very interesting. And, for what we have found is that it seems to be something that's extremely effective. People seem to really enjoy doing it. And they had a sense that it would be very, very valuable. And it was very consistent with what we had been observing with other kinds of practices. So it was a really good opportunity to look at this practice. And actually, the study that we wound up doing with them was the first longitudinal study that looked at what meditation does for you. There had been studies of what we had done, say, I'm going to meditate now, and we saw what went on in the brain. There were some interesting studies that started to show that long-term meditators have fundamentally different brains than people who are non-meditators. And for example, one of the interesting things, now getting more specific to your question, is that the frontal lobes of long-term meditators are actually bigger or thicker than the frontal lobes of people who are non-meditators. And that's part of what's really interesting in terms of helping people to help to prevent dementia and particularly Alzheimer's disease.
What goes on in the frontal lobe?
So the frontal lobe is very involved in helping us to concentrate, helping us to focus our attention on different tasks. So, if you're asked to remember a person's name or directions, then your frontal lobe helps you to do that. And it's also involved in what's called executive processes. So that's keeping your checkbook, keeping your schedule, remembering, what you got to do next Saturday, figuring out what things you have to do at work and so forth. So the frontal lobe is really fundamental to your cognition. And it works with your temporal lobes along the side of the brain that really help you with memory as well. So the fact that your frontal lobes become thicker, it goes back to what we were talking about earlier a little bit, the analogy of the muscle. In many ways, the brain is like a muscle, and the more you use it, literally what these studies suggested is that your brain becomes thicker, just like the more you lift weights, your muscles become thicker.
The more you use it, this is a so there are people who do nothing but worry all day long. I know people who just worry. They're using their brain all day long, but they're not going to be protected against dementia. If anything, the stress
makes it worse.
So there's a lot of different types of stress, right? There's hormetic stress that a little bit of this makes you stronger, but then there's stress that it wears you out after a while.
Right.
We live in a culture today of chronic stress. Right. The news, the pandemics, the politics. My phone keeps telling me I got to pay attention to this. We have nothing but fragmented thought. Our brains are working all day long. But if anything, that's speeding us along to having memory problems.
That's right. So it goes back to what we were saying a little while ago that you're picking up on perfectly, which is that when we're overstressed, when our brain is revving and revving and revving, then that's a problem. But when we can use it effectively, just like, it's like if all I do is just, use my arms going back and forth, but I'm not really doing anything with it, I eventually fatigue and it doesn't work that well. Whereas if I train it properly, and I know how to strengthen it properly, and I know how to kind of work with it, and I know how to rest it and then use it, and rest it and then use it, then it becomes more, it becomes stronger and stronger and stronger. So what the meditation practices do, it's sort of like that. It's sort of like the general exercises like lifting weights or running that kind of strengthen the overall function of the brain. And interestingly, going back to your specific point about the stressors, what the frontal lobes actually do is they help to regulate our emotional responses, which is what begins to become activated during all that stress. So we have what's called the limbic system, our emotional centers. And when we are stressed, that limbic system is what kicks in and is on all the time. And then that causes more and more stress. And the stress actually starts to damage the brain. It actually releases stress hormones that actually damage the neurons in the brain themselves. But on the other hand, if you apply a good kind of stress, which is through concentration or meditation, one, you help to suppress that anxiety and that stress response in the brain. But two, you also turn on your frontal lobes so that they begin to activate more. You begin to be able to concentrate better, and you begin to be able to regulate your emotional responses more effectively. And now, so when we got into the Kirtan Kriya study, what we had seen were these studies that showed that people who were long-term meditators had different brains than those who weren't. But there's a critical chicken and the egg question, which is, was their brain thicker because they had been doing these exercises over a period of time, like we were just talking about, or is it possible that they were just built that way, and that's why they found meditation to be very good for them? Mm-hmm. So we said, well, we've got to figure this out. And then the Kirtan Kriya study came along, and that's where we took people who had never meditated before, who were older individuals who were complaining of memory problems. And we said, we're going to start you on this meditation program, and we're going to have you do it for 8 weeks. We're going to have you do it every day for 12 minutes a day. It goes back to your point about time and things like that. It was hard this is why I like this study, because I thought very few people are going to be able to make a good argument that they don't have 12 minutes to do this.
Yes. Yes.
And then, we're going to scan your brain initially, and then we're going to scan your brain in 8 weeks, and we're going to see how you're doing, and we're going to look at your memory, and we're going to look at your emotions as well. And so we found some really impressive and significant changes that were consistent with this idea of the frontal lobes becoming thicker. So we were looking at the function of the brain, not just the structure, but how much the brain was working. And we use a specific kind of scan called a SPECT scanner, which basically allows us to look at the function of the brain by looking at blood flow. And we inject a little bit of a radioactive tracer that circulates, it gets up into your brain, and the brain works kind of like your car engine. So the more any part of your brain needs to work, the more gasoline it gets, and in this case, it's blood flow. And so those areas, as we say in our, euphemistically, they light up.
Yeah.
And so one of the findings that we saw was that not when you were meditating, but just when you were at rest. And that was what we did. We scanned people initially just at rest. Then we taught them the meditation practice, and we scanned them while they did the meditation program for the first time. We sent them home for 8 weeks. They came back, and we scanned them again at rest, and then, while they were meditating. And when we compared the two resting scans, the pre and the post, after 8 weeks, one of the most important findings that we saw was that the frontal lobes were more active after doing the Kirtan Kriya practice for 8 weeks. So what that means is that, and this gets back to what we were just saying, that now the frontal lobe is functionally stronger. It's functionally more active, which means it helps you to concentrate better. It helps you to remember things better. And it suppresses the stresses and the anxiety. So people reported lower levels of anxiety, lower levels of depression, lower levels of stress. So all of these things happen by simply doing this, doing this very basic kind of meditation practice. But there were other changes as well, and that to us was also exciting. So some very central areas of the brain, our temporal lobes and another part of our brain called the thalamus, which coordinate all of our thought processes, were also significantly affected by doing this practice. So these are the kinds of things that we were able to show with this study, that doing a practice like the Kirtan Kriya meditation can be very effective. And since we also know, in terms of Alzheimer's disease, that people whose brains are more active and more functionally strong, that gives you what they call the cognitive reserve to be able to stave off the neurodegeneration that occurs as part of the disease. And so, this is what led us to really hope that certainly as part of an overall program of being healthy and, some of the things that you mentioned at the beginning about diet, nutrition, and so forth, meditation becomes a really powerful part, an important prong of that approach to trying to keep the brain healthy and to try to stave off Alzheimer's disease and other kinds of neurodegenerative processes.
So literally from the first meditation session, you could see the brain activity.
Yes.
Well, yeah. This is important. The reason I want to point this out is one of the things that frustrates people about things like TM, where you're focusing on one mantra and thoughts jump in and you push them out and you go back to your mantra. And the more often you do this, the faster it happens. And people feel like, gee, this can't be doing anything for me. I'm going to have to invest weeks and months into this before it starts doing something. I want to point out that from the very first meditation session that you used baseline, you saw the changes in the brain already starting to light up, so to speak.
That's right. So when the person first started the meditation, their frontal lobe turned on. And so again, the frontal lobe turns on when you are concentrating, when you're focusing attention, and when you're focusing on a mantra, your frontal lobes are going to turn on. But what happened was, much like, again, exercising a muscle, if you keep turning it on every day, then eventually it sort of stays on. It becomes actually, stronger or more active in this case. And then that process begins to spill over into other kinds of domains. And that's an important point too, which is that, a lot of times people say, oh, okay, well, I'll just do a lot of crossword puzzles. That's really good for me to concentrate. And what the data show is that if you do a lot of crossword puzzles, you get really good at doing crossword puzzles, but it doesn't necessarily,
translate to other things.
Right. But what we've also talked about, and again, we mentioned this in the Brainweaver book, is that the more you do lots of different things, your brain has all these incredible cognitive powers. So, it's great to do crossword puzzles, but then, you want to read a book, you want to have a conversation with a friend, you want to watch a documentary on something. The more you engage all the different parts of your brain, ultimately the better. But a practice like Kirtan Kriya and other types of meditation practices, that's kind of like, using the muscle analogy, if you want to be really good at basketball, you shoot a lot of basketballs. You don't hit baseballs. But whether you want to be a good baseball player or a good basketball player, you might lift weights or you might run.
Right.
So meditation, so meditation is like running or lifting weights. It's kind of good no matter what you ultimately hope to achieve, what you want to do, whether it's with your job, with your life, with your relationships, or trying to help prevent, neurodegenerative diseases. It seems to be helpful along lots of different domains, but then you also have to develop those other cognitive domains as well.
I want to take our first commercial break, but before we do that, I want to promote the book real quick. So the book is called Brainweaver, and this is a culmination of all of your research, and obviously in this new study as well. You can get it one of two ways. You can use our trackable link, shrnetwork.biz/brainweaver, all one word, or you can go to andrewnewberg.com, and that's AndrewNewberg.com to get the book. Listen, I promote a lot of books on this show, but I'm going to go out on a limb and say that this one book could have the greatest effect on your life the fastest, because it starts working right away. And we're going to talk about what they noticed in the study. And we're going to talk about BDNF when we come back, because that's the reason everybody's microdosing LSD, including me. But I did do a lot of LSD in the 60s and the 70s, so this is not something new for me. But I want to talk a little bit about BDNF when we come back from the break. How's that sound, Doc?
Sounds good.
All right, stay tuned. We'll be right back with more Superhuman Radio.
New Mass Pro Synthogen X2 just upped its own legendary game. To distance itself even further from the rest of the pack, Synthogen X2 now has double the key active ingredients. If you've ever wondered what steroid-like recovery feels like, Synthogen X2 delivers. See why others compare it favorably to powerful bodybuilding drugs at synthogen.com. Mass Pro Synthogen. When you train with it, you'll gain with it.
Remember those rectangular toaster pastries you used to love when you were a kid? Well, Legendary Foods has just made them better. The new cake-style tasty pastry is like nothing you've ever had before. With 20 grams of high-quality protein and less than 1 gram of sugar, you'll feel like you're cheating, but you're not. Go to shrnetwork.biz/legendary and use the code SHR10 to save 10% off your purchase of tasty pastries. Now available in cookies and cream, red velvet cake, birthday cake, blueberry, strawberry, brown sugar cinnamon, and hot fudge sundae. Go to shrnetwork.biz/legendary and use code SHR10 today. Meditation. If there is one mineral you should be worried about not getting enough of, it's magnesium. Magnesium is the body's master mineral, powering over 300 critical reactions, including detoxification, fat metabolism, energy, and even digestion is influenced by the presence of magnesium. That's why I'm so excited to tell you about a new magnesium product I've been taking now called Magnesium Breakthrough. It's the ultimate magnesium supplement, easily the best I've ever seen or experienced. With all 7 forms of magnesium, I was able to arrange an amazing deal for my audience, and I guarantee it's the best deal available on this product. Seriously, with volume discounts combined with our custom 10% coupon code SHR10, you can save up to 40% off select packages of Magnesium Breakthrough. And I promise that this deal is only available on this specific website, magbreakthrough.com/SHR. You won't find that deal on Amazon or even on the company's own website. Go to magbreakthrough.com/SHR and use code SHR10 to save up to 40% off select packages of Magnesium Breakthrough. Being superhuman means being conscientious about the choices we make. White Oak Pastures is superhuman when it comes to raising livestock. They're committed to animal welfare, land regeneration, and rural revival. They responsibly manage the entire process from the pasture to your doorstep. High quality, pasture raised, great tasting meat from a farm you can trust. Full nose to tail selections. They even have options for your pet. Go to shrnetwork.biz/whiteoak and use code SHR20 to save 20% off your entire first order. Whether your goal is to build muscle or burn fat, you'll find everything you need at Redcon One. Need help getting a good night's sleep? Try Fade Out, or the most popular pre-workout supplement on the market today, Total War. Sign up for their new Transformation Challenge and win $10,000, or shop for apparel that people at the gym will know that you are serious about your training. Need a testosterone booster that works? Check out Boomstick. Whatever you need, you'll find the best quality supplements on the market at Redcon One. Go to redcon1.com. That's REDCON1.com, or go to superhumanradio.net and click the Redcon One banner ad today.
Move over, superheroes. This is the Superhuman Channel.
Welcome back. We're talking with Dr. Andrew Newberg. We're talking about a recent paper that shows some benefits, perhaps protective benefits, to helping people avoid developing Alzheimer's. We have to be careful how we say these things. I've had Dr. Dale Bredesen on the show a few times. He's very cautious about saying we're not curing Alzheimer's.
Right.
Maybe some ways to, let's just say, push back the symptoms of this disorder, to be fair to everyone in the medical orthodoxy. So BDNF is a common word now amongst most people. They've learned what it is. They've learned that it increases new neuronal sprouting.
Right.
Our brain shrinks as we age. It may reverse that shrinking. People are microdosing LSD and ayahuasca and everything else. And there's good universities like the College of London that are doing some really profound studies on major depressive disorders and microdosed LSD because of its value to stimulate both the trajectory and density of new neuronal sprouting. Hasn't that already been shown to be one of the benefits of long-term meditation?
Yeah, there's definitely a number of studies that have shown in a variety of different meditation programs, including yoga and mindfulness and so forth, that BDNF is something which is increased by those practices. So absolutely. I mean, and it kind of gets back to one of the points that you made at the very beginning, which is that, meditation is sort of the easiest thing to do, and sort of taking a course. I mean, anybody can meditate without any cost at all. And, you can do it at wherever you'd like to be. And it is something that has these very profound effects, not only on the brain, but really at the microscopic level and the microbiological level, and looking at some of these different mediators like BDNF and other neurotransmitters that are all affected by it. So absolutely. I mean, it's a natural way of doing it without necessarily having to, to resort to going to some of these medications. I mean, anytime you take a medication, there's always risks of different side effects and things like that. So it's always better to try to minimize that.
Avoid medication at all costs.
If you can. Sometimes you have to have it.
Dr. Dharma Singh Khalsa, who is the collaborator on this paper you just published, correct?
Yes.
Okay. And he says, I really appreciate our collaboration with Dr. Newberg. I'd like to add that as we age, our body may decrease, but the good news is that our spirituality can dramatically increase. To bring this full circle, this paper reveals that when you evolve spiritually, you also help prevent Alzheimer's. Now, that's great. And we have a lot of people who are very spiritual. And you don't have to be any particular type of religion to be spiritual, right? Spirituality just means that you have this awareness that it doesn't end with you. There is something more. Some people like to talk about the universe and channeling the universe. Other people like to talk about a deity, God, Allah, whatever. Right. But the reality is that spirituality really, in its raw term, is what I said earlier. When you're doing something, whether it's meditation or prayer, and you feel that sense that the hair on the back of your neck is standing up, you feel, and it's really dopamine. Let's call it what it is. But when you make that connection with thought and physiology, and that's really what it is. It's connection between thought and physiology. That is really what we talk about when we talk about spirituality, isn't it?
Yes, and I'm so pleased that Dr. Khalsa and you brought this up, because I was thinking about one of the things that we haven't talked about yet. We've been focusing a lot on meditation, which is great and very, very valuable. But there is that other piece to it, which is the feelings that you get. It's the experience that you have of connecting to something greater and so forth. And this is what led Dr. Khalsa to come up with the concept of spiritual fitness, even, which is what we're all talking about here. And that's this idea that the more you do have that sense of connection, the more that you feel that you have this spiritual part of yourself. Again, the evidence is very strong to show that can be beneficial on a lot of fronts, especially when it comes to how your brain operates. And there's a lot of tangential evidence as well. So, we see studies of people who are spiritual, who have better mortality rates, have lower rates of different diseases. They have less depression. It protects, being religious or spiritual protects against suicide, protects against depression, and so forth. And again, these are but it's these practices like meditation, for example, that can really help people to find their own paths towards spirituality. And sometimes it is within a religious tradition, and when it does, that can be great. But it doesn't have to be, as you mentioned. And there are a lot of different pathways that people can work towards, especially a lot of these kinds of meditation practices like Kirtan Kriya, that can really help people to find that path. And as Dr. Khalsa mentioned, as you enhance your own sense of spirituality, as we've been saying all along, these changes that are going on in the brain, the thicker frontal lobes, the more active brain function, the BDNF and so forth that gets released, these are all things that help us to improve our brain's function and hopefully help us to, as you said, push off Alzheimer's disease and just overall memory loss and aging as much as possible.
Let's take a look at this image that Natalie set up for me and just discuss this. This is benefits of 12 minutes a day from Kirtan Kriya, and we're going to tell you how to meditate this way, because actually, I think that this is the way I'm going to meditate from now on. There's certain things that I like about it that I'm going to ask for clarification. So the increased energetics, improved epigenetics. I want to know how you measured that one. Increased synaptic function, increased gray matter volume. That's easy to tell. Upregulation of immune function. That's easy to tell. Reduce multiple risk factors for Alzheimer's disease. Increased telomerase and telomere length. That's a big one. Downregulation of inflammatory genes. That's a huge one. And increased cerebral blood flow, significant brain areas. Well, these were all actually quantified through scientific testing, right?
Right. Now, not all of these were done all in this one study. There's a lot of stuff here, but we focused a lot more on on specifically the cerebral blood flow. But there have been other studies, in fact, some that Dr. Kals has been involved in, that have looked at things like telomere length, and this also expands even into other meditation practices, which have also been looked at that have been shown to be able to to increase, the telomere lengths. And for those who don't know, I mean, that has to do with your chromosomes and the integrity of your chromosomes, and presumably as your telomeres get longer, that keeps the integrity of your chromosomes better and helps to stave off aging and the degradation of your DNA. So, and then when it comes to other aspects, when you talk about things like epigenetics, and we're talking about how to we have our genes that code for neurotransmitters and the different things about who we are. But when one does a meditation practice like Kirtan Kriya, it changes the way our brain and our body are operating. It can change the sensitivity of our receptors. It can change how our body set point is in terms of its stress responses and so forth. And so all of these are things that can change both in the moment, but then also over, certainly over time. And we start to see this, and these are it reduces inflammation. And again, all these are slightly different studies, but part of what's been exciting, when I first got into doing this, back in the 1990s, there were like 2 or 3 studies that looked at meditation practices. And now there are hundreds of studies looking at meditation, both in terms of imaging as well as, really interesting stuff looking at the immunological responses. Some very interesting studies that showed that if you give people a vaccine, like the flu vaccine, this seems to me is so relevant in today's pandemic world. If you're meditating, I mean, it's a very simple sort of model of what's going on. When you meditate, you lower your stress. Well, when you lower your stress, you lower your cortisol levels. And most people who think about cortisone that you put on your hand, or if you have an autoimmune disease, you take cortisol to suppress your immune system. So if your cortisol goes down, your immune system goes up. And that's exactly what was found, that actually people made more antibodies against the flu and other vaccines when they went through a meditation practice as part of that process of getting the vaccine. So if you're thinking about getting your COVID vaccine and helping it to work as effectively as possible, reducing your stress by doing a practice like Kirtan Kriya could be, really helpful for you.
Is there a time, when I took TM, they said, you meditate first thing in the morning and then once again late in the afternoon. Is there a better time to meditate for that one over the other? And please, Dr. Dharma, if you're still listening or watching, please feel free to type in a comment to this as well.
Sure. My feeling has been that, I don't think that there has been enough research really to show that meditating in the morning or in the evening is better or worse. I mean, some people will certainly have a sense based on, what they do and how they do it, which works best for them. Mm-hmm. And that gets back to the individualization aspect of thinking about these kinds of things too. In fact, even in our Kirtan Kriya study, we had, a number of people did it at night. Some people did it in the morning. We had one of my favorite sort of characters who did it was like a plumber, and he got up real early, and so he was doing this meditation at 4 or 5 o'clock in the morning. But he loved it, and it worked really well for him. So I think everybody has to figure out what works best for them. If you're in the middle of an incredibly stressful workday, maybe doing it at around the lunchtime in the middle of the day could be really helpful and powerful. And again, I think part of it too is that even some very simple, very brief kinds of practices, just some breathing exercises, without necessarily doing kind of the full-blown practice of Kirtan Kriya, can still be helpful. And something that can be, you could be doing that just sitting at your desk. You get, a stressful email and you just sit there quietly and you just take a couple of deep breaths. That will help to give you a little bit of a de-stress, even though, again, it's not necessarily the same effect of doing the Kirtan Kriya practice.
And in today's environment where everybody's so caffeinated, this is really the antithesis of what we're doing to ourselves today.
Right.
So one of the things I want to mention, we have a couple minutes here, is we've learned that epigenetics is much more than we've ever thought it was. We talked about this phenomenon on our show. There was a rat study where they gave rodents an electric shock accompanied by the smell of cherry. And then their offspring was introduced to the smell of cherry, and the little baby rodents freaked out. They got nervous, which means that transgenerational epigenetics may be what we convey species-specific information. Like baby deer know, stay away from humans. How do they know that? No one teaches it. It's inherited from the species. So we know there's a lot of good information coming out about transgenerational epigenetics. Much more so than just your predisposition to develop a disease if exposed to certain things in the environment. We know that actual intelligence is encoded this way. It would be fascinating to see a study on people who were meditating for years before they had children.
Right.
And then maybe even stopped meditating. So the children weren't exposed to this practice. They didn't know anything about it, but they somehow had different brain function.
Yeah, that'd be fascinating to do. I agree. I mean, these would be the kind of practice, the kind of studies going forward that we really do want to start to think about doing. That's a great thought.
Because we know that countries that survive famine have the highest depression and alcoholism rate of other developed nations, Ireland, Russia. So that transgenerational epigenetic intelligence was encoded into the offspring. Wouldn't it be fascinating to find out that if a generation of meditators could wipe that out?
Yeah, I'll have to talk with Dr. Kalsa about doing that. That's a great idea. I mean, it's a wonderful idea to think about that. And there have been some very interesting studies, really looking at the group effects and the long-term effects, not just for the meditator themselves, but, for the society as a whole and as well as you mentioned, passing it on to your progeny. There's some really interesting things that we could potentially look at. And the downside is that it's a very long study to do, so it'll take us a little bit of time to put that together.
It'd be hard to find people who were meditating where both partners or one partner was meditating before having children. So Dr. Dharma says, moving beyond modern science, let me just stop this timer because otherwise music is going to stop playing. Moving beyond modern science, the ancient healers and yogis from India actually prescribed doing your spiritual practices first thing in the morning. They called this sadhana, and I've heard that word before because they talk about it in TM, which means all blessings. The other thing that Dr. Dharma posts is not to be too esoteric, but the ancient also said, when you practice meditation, you influence 8 generations ahead of you. See, and they instinctively knew this because we need science to look. If you're observing populations, right, and you go, so-and-so, they never meditated. All their kids are crazy, but so-and-so meditates all the time and all their kids are well-grounded. People, we have science to prove the things we think or know are correct.
Right. Exactly. And, I was just going to say, I mean, this is, we should do this thing.
Yeah.
Well, and I was going to say, I mean, this is why people like Dr. Kalsa are so so wonderful to have and so valuable, because they recognize the spirit, the ancient wisdoms but they also recognize the value and the importance of sort of showing how we can understand that wisdom from a more modern scientific perspective and the value that has, because, it goes back to the very point that you're making at the beginning of the show. I mean, this is something that is accessible to everyone. And a lot of people say, that's that hokey, new age stuff or whatever. And I mean, it's always funny when people call it new age, because it's, as Dr. Kalsa was just saying, I mean, these are thousands of years old. And that wisdom is so profound and so powerful, but sometimes it really does help the modern day person to say, there is that randomized double-blind placebo-controlled trial that shows that it really is helping. Maybe I should try it. So, it's a way of blending science and spirituality together. It's a field that I sometimes refer to as neurotheology, which really looks at these questions and looks at things from the very esoteric, as Dr. Kalsa was just mentioning, to the very practical. And that's what's so important, I think, and so valuable for us to think about as we go forward here. So these are, wonderful, wonderful points. And it's interesting because, I mean, as when you're reading the one point about doing the practice in the morning, but there are traditions, for example, like Islam or Judaism, where you're supposed to do daily practices, at maybe 4 or 5 different points throughout the day. So again, I mean, these are really wonderful questions for us to begin to look at and to understand.
Can you do curtain kriya twice a day, 3 times
Oh,
a day?
sure, absolutely,
Okay.
yeah,
But all you really need to see these effects is one 12-minute session.
exactly.
It's really fascinating. Stay tuned. When we come back, we're going to teach you how to do this meditative process on your own for free. You're going to get your life changed right now. Stay tuned. I need to share with you all a revolutionary new wearable technology called Happy. Happy allows you to enjoy the effects of caffeine, alcohol, nicotine, melatonin, and muscle relaxants without actually ingesting anything. Yes, really. They figured out the unique magnetic signature of each of these molecules and recorded them. Just put the Happy on, choose the signal you want, and it starts projecting the magnetic signature of that molecule that you choose, like coffee for feeling alert. Go to happy.com/SHR. That's HAPBEE.com/SHR to learn more and unlock an $80 discount exclusively for the Superhuman Radio listeners. Every day, there's a new wellness trend. Eat that, do this, avoid those. How do you know where to start or who to trust? Inside Tracker helps you cut through the noise by analyzing your blood, your DNA, your lifestyle, and your fitness tracker to provide you with a science-backed, trackable action plan on how to live, age, and perform better. Personalized, one-size-fits-one recommendations to help you optimize you. For a limited time, Inside Tracker is offering Superhuman Radio listeners 25% off the entire store. Go to shrnetwork.biz/inside tracker, INSIDETRACKER, to save 25% off. Change begins on the inside. Meditation. If there is one mineral you should be worried about not getting enough of, it's magnesium. Magnesium is the body's master mineral, powering over 300 critical reactions, including detoxification, fat metabolism, energy, and even digestion is influenced by the presence of magnesium. That's why I'm so excited to tell you about a new magnesium product I've been taking now called Magnesium Breakthrough. It's the ultimate magnesium supplement, easily the best I've ever seen or experienced. With all 7 forms of magnesium, I was able to arrange an amazing deal for my audience, and I guarantee it's the best deal available on this product. Seriously, with volume discounts combined with our custom 10% coupon code SHR10, you can save up to 40% off select packages of Magnesium Breakthrough. And I promise that this deal is only available on this specific website, magbreakthrough.com/SHR. You won't find that deal on Amazon or even on the company's own website. Go to magbreakthrough.com/SHR and use code SHR10 to save up to 40% off select packages of Magnesium Breakthrough. Being superhuman means being conscientious about the choices we make. White Oak Pastures is superhuman when it comes to raising livestock. They're committed to animal welfare, land regeneration, and rural revival. They responsibly manage the entire process from the pasture to your doorstep. High quality, pasture raised, great tasting meat from a farm you can trust. Full nose to tail selections. They even have options for your pet. Go to shrnetwork.biz/white oak and use code SHR20 to save 20% off your entire first order. Remember those rectangular toaster pastries you used to love when you were a kid? Well, Legendary Foods has just made them better. The new cake-style tasty pastry is like nothing you've ever had before. With 20 grams of high-quality protein and less than 1 gram of sugar, you'll feel like you're cheating, but you're not. Go to shrnetwork.biz/legendary and use the code SHR10 to save 10% off your purchase of tasty pastries. Now available in cookies and cream, red velvet cake, birthday cake, blueberry, strawberry, brown sugar cinnamon, and hot fudge sundae. Go to shrnetwork.biz/legendary and use code SHR10 today.
This is the Superhuman Channel, where we use oxygen for the power of good.
We're going to plug the book one more time, and then we're going to teach you this type of meditative process, which is really kind of cool. The book is called Brain Weaver, and you can get it one of two ways. You can use our trackable link, shrnetwork.biz/brainweaver, or go to Andrew Newberg, and that's NEWBERG.com. Okay, so correct me if I'm wrong. So I have a video I found on YouTube. I'm going to try to play it. Hold on a second. I got to kill this first. There we go. There we go. Okay. So I found this on YouTube, And I think I'm gonna just play this a little bit, and then I'm gonna ask you some questions.
Okay.
So this is the someone who took the time to create a video to walk people through this process.
Sadanama, Sadanama, Sadanama.
Now the Satanama is the mantra.
That's exactly, yes.
And I don't even want to give the meaning of the words. You know why?
That's fine.
And then you create symbolism, and people are like, "Oh, I don't know if I want to say that." They're just sounds. Sa ta na ma. You start out saying them audibly and loud.
Correct.
Then, as you progress, you start to get lower and lower until you're just whispering them.
Right.
And then you just transition to saying it in your head.
Exactly.
I love that. There's a nuance to that, because when I learned my mantra, I wasn't allowed to say it out loud. You know, I don't really know if that was really. They don't want me to teach other people how to meditate or what, but it was so much harder. But if you're saying it out loud, and then quietly, then the transition to saying it in your head and hearing it is so much easier.
Yeah, I think so. And then you get, it comes back out on the other side, and then you come back into a whisper, and then ultimately out loud. So
right.
So yeah, it's. When I first learned about it from Dr. Khalsa, I was very taken by it, because it's so simple, it's so easy. It seems like something that basically everyone can do, and it really has some wonderful potential as something that people can just make a regular part of their lives. And in fact, actually, as you said, that's the basics of doing it. And then the other piece of it are doing these mudras, which is where you move your fingers to the sounds. And so it's the index finger to the thumb with the sa, and then the middle finger ta, and then the ring finger na, and then ma with the pinky finger. And then you keep doing that. And which in and of itself is interesting too, because now there's a lot of different. It goes back to our point about engaging the brain in a lot of different ways. So you're using your motor function. You're doing timings with it. You're saying something out loud. Then then you're just concentrating on it. So there's a lot of different elements to it, which is what makes it so powerful. And for people who really are interested in pursuing it, Dr. Khalsa's group, the Alzheimer Research and Prevention Foundation, they actually have some really great resources that take you through. And you were showing that video. It really does help sometimes to have, at least at the beginning of it, somebody to help sort of guide you through it. And
I was going to ask you that. Can you start out by using the video?
Yeah.
And then transition
and
to
then getting exactly. So and we did that with a lot of the people in our study, is that they did it with an audio file that we gave them, and so that they could really learn it and do it. And then eventually they some people love to just use it because it was just very nice and easy. There were some people who said, I don't need it anymore, and then they started to do it on their own. So it really just depends on what works best for you. And then it opens up other kinds of practices that have, variations on the theme of it, which can be also very, very powerful.
Well, let's talk about those for a second. But before I do that, I want to, for the listening audience who's not watching,
yes,
it's Kirtan, Kirtan, Kriya, Kriya. If you go to YouTube, there's several people who've taken the time to create videos where you can use their video to get started and get into the meditative process until you feel like you can do it on your own, which I'm sure you could do it on your own right away.
Right.
I love, because you have to focus. Sa, ta, na, ma. You have to think about it, and it keeps your mind from drifting. Part of the problem with the mantra is your mind wants thoughts. It's
exactly.
Wait, I forgot to get this at the grocery store. And then you have to stop it and push it out and then go back to your mantra. With this, you have to think about what you're doing, but you're thinking about something that doesn't use any of the memory faculty functions. You know what I mean?
Right.
It's like it really. I
sort
think
of takes up your mind.
Yes, it's so simple. I love it.
Right.
I'm actually going to use this from now on when I meditate, and I can actually say I can easily do 12 minutes a day. There's no doubt.
And another really, to me, a really lovely piece of it, as you played in that the video that you just played for a few moments, people could hear it is actually a kind of singing meditation.
Melodic. It's very melodic.
So there's even that element to it as well. It's not just repeating a phrase over and over again, but now there's tones to it, and those tones vibrate within you and so forth. So there's a lot of really outstanding kinds of components. I mean, obviously this is something developed hundreds and hundreds of years ago, but when we kind of look at it now through the lens of cognitive neuroscience and psychology and all that, you can see how and why it becomes so effective.
I always say to the audience, share this show or share a show. But this is a show that everyone needs to share, because if you send this out to a bunch of friends and family, they listen to the show, they start doing this, you may get one person who you actually change the quality and content of their life from them hearing this. And it's free. They can do it at their leisure.
Pretty much.
I mean, really, just people only think things that cost money are sexy and effective. Yep. Not so. What are some of the other things that you can use when we were talking about this? Is some other things that you can do, you said, that this could lead into?
Well, I mean, there are other practices within the tradition that led to Kirtan Kriya that people can explore. Now, a lot of, that gets into a little bit more of the spiritual fitness
spirituality.
Piece. Yeah. And people can really, engage that a little bit more. And again, I mean, this, to me, this really does open up the larger spiritual piece, which is, how does one decide to utilize these kinds of concepts in whatever spiritual pursuits a person has. And, but again, the data is really, very exciting, and, it shows those physiological processes. So, it is something that can really be wonderful for anyone who wants to try it.
If you're watching or listening to this show, make a commitment to do this for 2 weeks. 2 weeks. 2 weeks seems to be the time frame that your physiology starts to either adapt or repel what it is that you're doing. If you get on HRT and you start taking injectable testosterone, it takes 2 weeks for the hypothalamus testicular pituitary axis to be affected and stop producing endogenous testosterone. So 2 weeks seems to be something that the body, I know the body doesn't know 14 days, but for some reason that 2 week window, do it for 2 weeks and see if you start sleeping better, if you feel less stressed out, if you feel less about binge eating, see if it does anything for you, your blood pressure, whatever. Because if it does, then keep on keeping on.
Yeah, exactly.
And if it doesn't, stop and go back to drinking your energy drinks. That's all. Let's plug the book one more time here. The book is called Brainweaver. You can get it by going to shrnetwork.biz/brainweaver or Andrew Newberg, and that's NEWBERG.com. Did we miss anything, Dr. Newberg?
I think there's just so much more we can always talk about, but we covered a lot of great ground, and I think, things that are really important for people to think about. So this has been great.
And hopefully we'll just get some people to start meditating, because I know a lot of people who meditate, and this is something interesting. You can't tell if people dye their hair today, but I know a lot of people who meditate and they either have no or very little gray hair. People that have meditated their entire life. Howard Stern is a lifelong meditator. You know what I mean?
Right.
There's a lot of billionaires who get up every morning. The first thing they do is meditate.
Yep.
A lot. They wouldn't do it if they didn't feel that it was affecting their performance. Right. They wouldn't do it. They would be like, why am I doing this? This isn't helping me. I'm going to stop. Yeah. So I think it's
athletes.
Yeah. Athletes.
Yeah.
Athletes. Let's see. We have one more comment here. Let's see who it is. Please share this website as well. Alzheimer'sPrevention.org. Alzheimer'sPrevention.org. Very good, Dr. Dharma. Thank you so much for putting that up there. And we'll get the audience to pay attention to. Listen, thanks so much for being here today.
Thank you. It was a lot of fun.
Take care. And that's it for today. We'll be back tomorrow with the Blueprint Power Hour, so don't miss that. And please share this show. As I said, I really think it could make the difference in someone's life, and you will be the gift giver. We'll see you tomorrow.